Hey everybody, it's Crisco with Crisco Builds, and I am cleaning out my garage. I'm taking a break because I just don't want to, but I pushed everything to one side and it's a total disaster. It is gross, yes, but I have 9 shelving boards that I've been hoarding and I want to do something with them. Let's see what happens. Alright, so shelving board into this. Okay, so I knew I wanted to make a table, and so I came up with a design. How can I use 9 short shelves or shelving boards? So I thought, let's do a butcher block. I've always loved butcher block tops, and I didn't know what else I could do with shelving boards that wouldn't look stupid. So I'm just gonna start cutting them all up. I'm gonna take them all, and I just went out there with the table saw and cut all 9 into 1-inch strips because I thought that was enough. I was going to use just 4 full shelving boards and set them at an angle, but they were just too small. So when I was looking at the design, I was like, I've got to make those last, because I really don't have, and I didn't want to, I guess it was a challenge for me. I didn't want to use anything else, just those shelving boards. If I only had the shelving boards, what could I actually build with it? I did use I used 8 screws that I had lying around, and everything else that I used was just in the garage. And we'll see later. I found out that I've had a lot of stuff in my garage that I had not used, and it caused many problems. So I got all the boards cut. I didn't think I was going to need the front, so it had routed edges on the front of them, and I didn't think I was going to need those. I thought I had enough, so I'm just arranging them all to where I can get a good, some of them were longer than others. Most of them were in the 29 range, and then 30s, and then I think those are 36, the bigger ones. So I'm just doing the math. So I need so many for the legs. I can only get, I have to have big enough legs to support the table. So now I'm going to measure out, and then I added up all the inches, and I knew it was going to be 20, I wanted it 20 inches deep or wide, and then about 52 inches long. That's what I was shooting for, and so that's what I got. So I had actually 27 boards long, and then I just added up all the inches. So I didn't have anything for I wanted something underneath to stabilize them across that they could set on, and I didn't have any more boards, so I just had what was left over here is the routed edge. So I'm going to glue them together and then cut off the routed part, except the part that you can see, and it'll be a kind of a sculpted edge. It'll look pretty good, I think. So that's what I did. So now I'm redoing the math just to make sure. I thought I was going to have to make it either a little shorter or only go like 19 and a half inches, because I cut them at 1 inch thick, but they're still only 3/4 inch boards. So I did the math, and I just barely had enough, but I had to take off some for the legs. So now I have less boards for the legs, which is going to make them smaller, which is what I didn't want to happen. So I used the front routed edge that I had left over, and I turned the boards sideways using the 1 inch side instead of the 3/4 inch side, which made up the difference, and now I had enough boards. here I just measure the lengths so I don't waste any boards. Just like you're putting down flooring, I wanted to give at least enough space so we had good connection when we glued them together. And so I'm only using glue. Use the Type Bond. There's two different types of glue, a regular wood glue, and then they have another glue that's made for plastic paints, painted material, wood, and even metal. So that's what I use on these boards because I didn't want to sand. Again, lazy a little bit. I didn't want to sand all of them down to make them all nice and fresh wood to glue together, which would have been a better bond, but it's supposed to be just as good. So I'm setting up because I'm just gonna plunge cut these. And you know, I've had this table saw for like 5 years, and I never knew how to move the fence on that stupid table saw. I've tried and tried, twisted the handle that's supposed to slide it left and right, and it would never move. So I just had to unhook it by hand, move it, and then try to set up the right angle so that's perpendicular. And I finally found underneath there's a little lever that locks it. So I finally got that done, and now I can move it. So this build actually helped me use my table saw. So I'm fitting them up. I just want to make that sure that they'll just barely fit in there because they're going to also hold it. Again, I don't have all the tools in the world. Not everybody does either. And so I try to build things the best of my ability with the tools that I have. So I'm going to use these as the clamps because I don't have any. I don't have anything that will hold it. And I'm not going to use ratchet straps because that'll tend to bow it. The largest clamp I have is an 8-inch. So some real woodworkers who have a nice shop and have lots of clamps, bar clamps, and 24-inch clamps to clamp tables. If they do that a lot, sure, that's something you have, but I don't. So I'm going to use that. We're going to use, and again, I've had this Bondo forever. It had some weird stuff inside of it, and then when I tried to mix the hardener, and the whole top popped off. So I'm using, this is its last leg. I threw this out afterwards because it had some funky stuff. It was almost hard already. So I'm just going to clean them up. And you can't even tell that there were some weird cross cuts on there. We'll clean these up and then we'll start working on the tabletop because I want to get these finished and painted. Yeah, I was cleaning that earlier with that. I could not get that chisel to even cut the wood. It was so dull. I did sharpen it and complete it. So there they are. They're ready to go. Now I'm going to cut the slots at the angles so I don't lose. I don't want any junk left over. So there they are. I got 27 slats. I'm just going to clean up the inside edges, get some of the paint off, and there were some runs on there, so we got that cleaned up. And then I'm going to get them down here on the ground. Again, this is the flattest most level place in my garage. None of my tables were even big enough for this to go on. And I looked at it and I was like, I'm going to keep some of the painted. I didn't notice, but the back sides were painted. And so when I put them down, I'm going to use some of those painted surfaces that you can see. I thought it'd make a good look. I like making that type of I guess, build where you can see what it used to be something else, and it's now carried on in a new way. Yep, don't have a big enough clamp. So I just clamped them with that, with the supports underneath. So now I'm going to measure out the legs while that's drying. And I couldn't do the whole thing. I was too afraid that they would start drying before I got them glued up. So I did it in 3 sets. So I measured them out, and there they are. I had just enough, and I literally had maybe 8 inches left of a couple boards, just 1 inch, 8 inches of 1 inch strips. So I had to piece that together, and their table's all glued up, looking good. And I know there's some gaps, and especially in between where the boards meet up, but that's fine because I'm gonna put epoxy on top and it's gonna lock everything else in. So on these legs, I'm gonna do a 15-degree angle cut and put them together so they have stability. I set that up. Just gonna sand down the top a little bit because I am going to stain it here. And again, I wanted some rough cut. I wanted the saw marks. I wanted it to have texture, and you know, it's not perfect, but I wanted to show that through there. And I know once I stain it, all those things are going to come out, and I really like that style anyhow. So there, I got them cut. They're set up. See that? So it's going to hold that angle there, a 30-degree angle. I'm going to glue those together, and then I'm putting that cross member is going to be mounted to those legs there. So I'm gluing those up. So now I'm just going to round off the edges. I could router them, but who has time for that? I don't want to get the router out. And not everyone has a router. And if you just sand the edges down, especially on a little table desk like this, it works really well. So I tried this stain out. I have a bunch of stain. Some of it is not good anymore. That was just too light, and I had this gel stain in here. I didn't think it was good, but I got it working, and I like it. It's a mahogany, walnut, a walnut stain. I think it looked good, so I'm just gonna wipe it on with a cloth. I like the variation in the tones of the wood. You know, I'm not putting it on perfect, but I want to see that difference. So I get it all on there. I got the painted, and then some darker, some lighter. I think it's looking good here. And that is it. And I'm going to flip it over and stain the bottom. I did not sand the bottom, so it looks a lot darker and a lot rougher. But it's always going to be the bottom of the table. So I didn't care much. I just didn't want it to be bare wood. Got it all set up, and so there are the gaps. So there's gaps where the two ends butt together, and there's some gaps where I didn't get it as tight, but I knew the epoxy was going to fall. It's going to fill those gaps mostly. So I tried some putty, and it was all hardened and dried up. It's like 3 or 4 years old. And then I put some glue in some of the bigger spots. I was going to tape some of the bigger spots, and I said I'm going to tape all the seams, just in case I can't see, and I didn't want it leaking out and all of it pouring out. So I taped up all the seams underneath. I have worked with epoxy a lot before, and I had some left over in my garage. So I'm doing the edges so I could build up a good. I wanted to flood the top because there's gonna be lots of gaps and things, so I wanted to make a lake on top, let that set in. And so when I usually do dirty pours like that, it doesn't. And you can see that is not supposed to be brown. The hardener is totally brown from age. And I should have known better by everything else being bad. And then I could not get that. I had to heat that way up, and it should not have been that hard to heat up to actual resin. And then I put a little copper flake in there, which I thought would be great. But this color, it should not be that color. It should not be white. It's so foamy, which has never, ever happened. But I think it's just the age. It was just not releasing. So I'm heating it, trying to, pop the bubbles. And finally, I thought it was going to be ruined. So I couldn't get it. So I start scraping it all off. Not all of it. I'm leaving some on there. But I can't do the flood technique like I wanted to. So I get it thinner and thinner, and I'm trying to heat it and get it out. So I just pull a bunch of it off and put it back into the bucket. And then trying to spread it and heat. And when I heat it, it's starting to release the bubbles, the air in there. But that should never happen. And that's never happened to me before. So I finally get it to where it's clear, most cases, but it's just not, there's not enough on there. And I'm not very happy with it. Not at all. So here it is, the next day. And I painted, I sprayed, I just used some spray paint that I had. It's just a satin black on here, so everything is level, so all that's going to sit on there, and I'm going to mount those. I've glued and screwed those on there, and then I'm gonna screw them underneath to mount them to the frame or the top. But we're gonna take a look. Look how bad. I'm just checking the fitment of it, but the tabletop is so bad. I don't know what I'm doing here. Yeah, I'm going to put 2 screws up from underneath when I mount it. I actually put 4. I put some on the outside too. But the tabletop. Let's take a look. It's so bad. I kept coming out and trying to pop bubbles, and a lot of it fell through, but as we look at that, when you look at if you look, there's all kinds of, some parts are nice and the other parts are just terrible. I wouldn't even give it to somebody like that. But I found the legs are not going to be, that 15-degree angle I cut in there just isn't enough to make them stable. So I needed, and I just had enough. So these were just little cut pieces that were on the floor when that were left over when I cut the last bit of those legs off, and so I'm using that as my 2 angles. So I got it all put together, and I pulled it out, and it looked so bad. I'm going back in, and I'm gonna do a second coat on the top to see if I can't fix it. And again, it was just foamy. I heated it up for an hour, and it was still foamy. So I had the heat gun on that for the whole time. I'm in there like 30 minutes, just heating it, moving it, trying to fill all the old gaps that were there and everything else, and finally got all those bubbles out of there, and they're getting clearer and clearer. But that's what happens when you use old things, and that's what makes things fun. You got to try and find the fun in inventing things and just fixing things and finding. So here it is. After I poured it, It's looking good. There's some air bubbles here that I'm gonna pop, but this is right after the second pour. I got a really good coat on there. And then here it is. I popped the air bubbles. Yeah, kept heating it every 45 minutes, keep coming back in there and popping them. But there it is. That is it. It's looking a lot better. Looks great. I love the multiple tones of the wood, the paint in there. Great butcher block top. The legs are really stable now. I think it looks great. And here's the outside. That bright sunlight really pulls out that copper in the reflections. But this is how you build a butcher block desk with 9 old shelving boards. And that's it. If you like to see more crazy builds or challenges, be sure and subscribe and like this video. Thanks for watching Crisco Builds.